The USDA crop report, leather is dying and beef is the problem, and extreme ownership. Welcome to Friday on the Fly. We are happy to have you. If you are joining us, that is, of course. If you're not, you don't hear this, and so that doesn't matter.
We are happy you're all here.
We're happy to have you wherever you are listening, and whenever you are listening. Thank you for joining us. Tomas, how you doing?
Good morning, Matthew. Doing well. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing well.
It's fantastic.
I'm glad not to be on the Clinton hit list. So. And moving on.
We know nothing. We claim to know nothing. And keep in mind, for this first article, it's very important to note that we are not experts.
That is, yes. I'll even look directly at the cameras. Not an expert at all on this. No. So we're not experts on the USDA report by any means on economics or any of that stuff, but we see it as irresponsible as a current events podcast from the Plow Talk network, you could say, of Bain Welker. To not mention this would be an irresponsible oversight, I would think. Right, Tomas?
Yeah, it's another one of those where something comes out on Monday and you're like, wow, if we can wait till Friday to talk about that, that'll be a miracle.
If we could read something about it, though, that usually,
sure.
You know.
We actually talked about it a little bit Wednesday. We were out at the State Fair, so we appreciate that opportunity.
Yes, there will be an episode coming out. It's going to be called a hodgepodge, basically. But episode did come out yesterday, though, on talking with Tony.
Tony Carroll and Michael Carroll, not related.
I wanted to say caller, and I was like, that is totally wrong. Not related, Michael Carroll and Tony Carroll, but both working for the 4-H side of things.
Another nice 4-H
Fair.
episode, so more of that to come, I'm sure. But yeah, check that out if you're interested. It was a good conversation.
Yes, indeed. So what's up first? Actually, I even wrote this in big lettering right here on my notes, so I'm glad I saw it. Almost missed it. Today, if you are in the vicinity of Bain Welker, Crawfordsville, and you would like to come get some food, converse with some fellow farmers and some Bain Welker employees, do a little bit of conversing,
networking,
mingling. Sure. You are welcome to come today to the Bain Welker Crawfordsville location for an open house starting at 3 o'clock this afternoon and running roughly to 7 o'clock this evening. And there will be some equipment out here that you can take a glance at. There will be other people, like I said earlier, you can mingle with. Just have a good time. Yep. Come out, enjoy an evening at Bain Welker.
We have a lot of experts coming in to answer your questions. We've got a couple new combines you can get up in and check out, the 50 Series combines.
Yes.
And actually have some customers and some employees brought in some antique tractors to kind of look at too. And I think our service manager, Luke, was bringing in his old International combine.
Nice.
So I'm going to go check it out actually when we're done here. It's pretty
That'll
cool.
Be good. So anyway, come check it out and enjoy an evening at Bain Welker. And by the way, if you're on the green side of things and you're listening to this and you've always wondered, I wonder what it'd be like to be a customer of Bain Welker, or if you already are a customer for, service or something like that, I wonder what it'd be like to join the red team.
Yep.
Come on down.
Come over here. You can actually schedule your fall demo while you're here. So schedule a demo for that combine if you get up in it and like it, and you can go test it out.
Yes, sir.
And harvesting this massive crop that we have, according to the USDA.
Yes.
It's a bumper crop, folks. Be prepared. It's going to be a long fall with all this.
No.
And again, we're not experts by any means, and we read this USDA. I read this USDA article about 3 times, and it's still pretty far over my head. But the general stats Matt's going to kind of go over, just pretty astounding. What can happen with just that report.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, being somebody again that is not a econ expert by any stretch of the imagination, let alone an ag econ expert. It is nonetheless interesting to me to see the numbers here. So the average trade estimate was 87 million acres, right? Was that just of corn? What is that of? Is that just
corn?
Just corn, right?
Those are just corn numbers.
So 87 million acres of corn planted, right? That was the estimate.
Correct. Acreage. Yep.
Acreage to be planted.
That's the trade estimate.
The trade estimate. The USDA's report, the recent one, well, let's go back to a previous report, right? Was 91.7 or 6?
91.7.
91.7 was the previous report of the USDA of corn. And now this report that came out this week was 90 million acres.
Right.
And then to just get through all the stats real quick here, and then we can talk a little bit about it. The yield factor for the average trade estimate was 164.7 bushels per acre. And the first USDA report in coordination with the acreage number here was 166 bushels per acre. And now the one that came out this week estimated 169.5 bushels per acre.
So our total acres planted went down in this report, which should be expected, right? The last report was high on acreage. This report wasn't low enough, right? According to that trade estimate, we're still 2.3 million acres above where the trade estimate says we should be. But it's not just that the acres went down a little bit. Okay, all we're giving to the farmer, we're recognizing that not everything got planted. No. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, not everything got planted, maybe. Not by a nearly enough margin here, but the yield looks really good. That crop looks great. We're gonna bump the bushels per acre here. What is that? 3.5 bushels per acre.
Yeah. So you take, to put it in the words of one guy that I listened to, you don't want to play hide and seek with the USDA, evidently, because they found 3 million acres that nobody else evidently had seen. And if you just do a little driving survey in many areas in the Midwest, you would be hard pressed to believe the report. But not only that, it's also like what you just said, that, okay, not only did we, quote unquote, find 3 million more acres, we also are thinking this is going to be a fantastic yield in comparison to what people may have thought or the average trade estimate was. And again, just take those two numbers, 3 million, or what'd you say, 2.3 is the more accurate number there if you're going by the decimal. And you take that and you multiply that by the difference between the yield factor of almost 5 bushels per acre. That's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's and
when you have the maximum daily loss on corn for multiple days in a row, it ends up being billions of dollars.
What was it that first day? Was it a quarter that corn went down? Is that what Jeff said the other day?
Yep, the daily limit. And I actually haven't got an updated number since Wednesday, so it may have gone down. It may have gone back up, but optimistically it went back up. But the video that we watched on a guy on Facebook doing a little Facebook Live there, kind of talking about the acreage and everything. Basically, in those first 2 days, the American farmer lost $5 billion.
Yeah, that's
and the ag economy in general lost $5 billion of revenue potential. Revenue.
Yeah. So that was the thing that we really wanted to draw out of it, because you don't necessarily have to be an expert for this comment, and that is that the gap between let me start it this way. So nobody else cared. Let's put it that way. That's a very general statement to make, maybe a hyperbolic statement even, but I think it's roughly true that nobody else but the farming community cared about this report. And that tells us that the rest of society isn't in tune with the economics of agriculture, right? So if this had been a $5 billion loss on Wall Street for anything else, there would have been reports about it for, a couple weeks probably. There'd be a talk about how Trump got this wrong, or how the government did this wrong. There'd be all sorts of speculation and everything else. There'd be a lot of talk. But other than in the ag community, there's not much talk, as far as I know, of the USDA report that people actually care about. My regular Twitter feed compared to the Plow Talks Twitter feed is substantially different. I don't see Ben Shapiro talking about the USDA. I don't see Jocko Willink or anybody else, people who are more on the popular scene of whether it's politics or or whatever else, they're not tweeting about the ag decline here in this report. So the reason I bring that up is because Tomas and I thought it'd be interesting, at least for a brief moment here. I know we've already talked about this probably too long, but it doesn't help the gap between the rest of society and the ag community when the rest of the culture doesn't understand the hit that this brings to the ag community potentially. And so one thing that we wanted to throw out there is, if you're, we probably don't have anybody that's not in the ag community listening to this podcast. So we're speaking, to farmers, or at least people who are associated with the ag industry. We want to do a better job of educating the general public about not just the woes. We can get really concerned about everybody making sure they understand how hard we have it. And that's not appealing to anybody. That's just going to make them think we're all a bunch of whiners. And if we do that all the time, then we are a bunch of whiners, right? So let's not be a bunch of whiners, first of all, and let's not give the public any reason to assume that about us. So let's especially educate them on the positive factors. But there are times, hopefully without whining about it too much, that we do need to tell them about the woes of farming, right? Because then hopefully people who better understand the economic crises that ag can go through will better understand why ag needs help in this area or in that area, or why so much money given to the farmer, government money or whatever else, educating people on this, if you have people in your life, especially those who it could be helpful potentially, because then maybe you pique their interest. So then they start asking you questions. Well, what about pesticides? What about herbicides? What about what you feed your calves? Why are they not pasture only? Why are stuff like that? Maybe you could start a conversation that way. And Tomas, you could get in here in anytime, but I think the thing with that is to not look down on them as if they should know all this stuff. That they don't know all this stuff because they're not in agriculture if you're talking to somebody outside of the ag community. So talk to them in a positive light about it.
Even sometimes we know it, but we don't know how to communicate it. So how do we have a productive conversation with somebody about organic farming? Yeah. Or how do we have an intelligent conversation and a productive conversation with somebody about animal abuse? That was something that was big here a few weeks ago, right? That comes to the forefront and everybody gets outraged by it.
Yeah, the general public cares about that, right? But they don't care about the success of, this farm or the charity that this this
and I don't know that they don't care, they just don't understand. We have to better educate and better prepare people for what it means. And this the last few years have been interesting with the different trade agreements that we've had and not had with different countries. It's brought a little bit of that to light, But again, we're more educated and we better understand the tariffs that are coming in on the goods that we purchase because it directly impacts us more than the non-farmer understands the impact that it has, that we don't have a trade agreement. We can't sell corn
or
to
something
China
like
soybeans.
Something with China with the African swine fever.
Sure.
We talked about that last week, right? So a lot of people in the general public, and this is where it just gets strange to me, but people probably care more about the pigs dying, right, in the country. Some of the, say, environmentalists, people who are like those animal activists that we just mentioned a brief moment ago, they'll care about that, but they won't think as much about, well, how is this impacting my fellow human being who's a farmer, the county over or outside the city limits, because it does affect grain prices when you have a huge swath of a product, this being swine in China, have to be destroyed or otherwise no longer produced. Mm-hmm. So
the key thing we keep harping on, and I think you've heard it from us multiple times, and we're going to keep saying it. We have to become better educated, and we have to have those conversations with people outside of our industry. I think that's very important.
Yes. And speaking of people outside the industry impacting things within the industry potentially, we have a little article on Bloomberg written by Lydia Mulvaney, I believe it is, and Denitsa, what the world? Teskova?
Teskova.
Anyway, that must be Russian. So it's titled America's Obsession with Beef is Killing Leather. So that gives you a little bit of understanding. The subtitle, I think, says a lot of it. The rise of athleisure. I'm guessing the Oz. Anyway, and vegan, quote unquote, clothing is also speeding the decline of an iconic U.S. industry. And there's a picture right under it of just piles and piles of hide, of what could be tanned leather if it was produced. But Tomas, give me a little bit about this article. I've talked too much.
Yeah, it's just very interesting. You go through and you read the value of the leather and how much of that the animal byproduct value was in leather. Up to 50%. As soon as 40 years ago, and now it's down to like less than 1% of the value is the actual hide of the animal.
Yeah.
They used to sell for, I just lost it in the article.
Well, here's a quote from the article, not a quote of somebody speaking, but the authors of the article here. The glut of cow hides has caused prices to plummet, rendering many worthless. And just as the American love for meat has caught on around the globe, so too has the abandonment of leather. From clothing to car seats, hides are even starting to go to landfills, while the smaller leather processors are going out of business. Continuing, just 5 years ago, prices soared after a drought shrank the U.S. herd to a 6-decade low. That was probably, 2012 then? Or, no, 13. 5 years ago. I'm thinking the drought that we had like in 2013/12 or whatever. Leather outpriced itself, forcing shoe and clothing designers to cut the material from their products. Combine that with the rise of athleisure, I guess, and the growing popularity of quote-unquote vegan clothing, and one can see why demand hasn't come back. So that's a quote from the article there.
Yeah, a hide from a branded cow the week of July 15th sold for as little as $4, down from as much as $81 just 5 years ago. Yeah. So it was worth $81, now it's worth $4. And the article talks a lot about it being pretty well simple supply and demand. We're eating more beef, therefore we're raising more cows, and we're harvesting more cows, and that's causing more hides to be available. Yeah. Therefore, the price of those are it's being devalued.
The Fonz is now wearing vegan clothing rather than his
fake leather. He's wearing pleather.
So, hard days for the Fonz there. So anyway, we thought this was interesting just because it's something we haven't, we've talked about the beef industry plenty, but this is a factor that I hadn't thought of, that the demand for beef, to consume beef, the meat product of a calf, is actually giving us a huge oversupply of the hides, and that's driving.
It's an interesting dynamic, and it's similar to the discussion we had when we talked about hemp. Anytime there's a stark increase or a major growth in an industry, it's always associated with a decline in something else of that industry.
Or with a stigma that it's given, right? I kind of talked about this when we were talking at the state fair about, you just mentioned hemp. Tobacco's going down, right? Mm-hmm. That's not just because people don't find a use for tobacco or don't enjoy tobacco. Other products, they just go by the wayside, maybe because something more advanced has come out, or they're just, retro now. But with tobacco, it has the added stigma of cancer, right? It has the added stigma of this is not good for you to consume. So it's not just something that's being outdone by another product. It's being outdone in a way that it's completely being avoided for that purpose. So I think the same thing is applying here with the attachment to vegan clothing, the whatever moral thing they're trying to posture with that. Stuff like that, with not killing calves because they don't want to have the hide on their boots or on their jacket. That's combining with the upsurge in desire to actually eat beef around the globe. So, it's interesting how these things all combine to impact an industry.
Yeah. So the leather makers out there, we feel for you. Continue to make really cool stuff.
I don't think this will last forever. So keep it up. Anyway, moving on. Extreme ownership, Tomas.
Yeah, so the last thing we wanted to do here today on our little whiplash segment was kind of challenge everybody who's listening to this. Matthew and I, on the way to the state fair, went through the forward preface and
introduction and about half or more of the first chapter.
Yeah, of a book by Jocko Willink and another
Leif Babin, I think
Babin.
is his last name.
Yeah,
two ex-Navy
SEALs.
SEALs. They fought together in the Battle of Ramadi over in Iraq in 2006 especially. They were for Task Force Bruiser of the Navy SEALs. Jocko Willink was commanding officer for that unit, and then he had Leif underneath him, also in a position of leadership. And anyway, when they exited the Marine Corps, when they exited the Navy SEALs, they both have started this company called Echelon Front, which is a consultant company helping businesses in their leadership skills and all that, because they found that the skills they learned through, I think Jocko must have been near 20 years in the Navy SEALs, and he was in the hardest fighting in Iraq during that initial, I guess not initial, 5 years into the war there, roughly. And anyway, they've written a book called Extreme Ownership. They've written some other books called, one's called The Dichotomy of Leadership, another one's the free discipline is freedom, maybe equals freedom, something like that. It's about discipline, a little booklet that Jocko wrote. But anyway, so we read this part of this one. I've listened to numerous podcasts. He has a podcast, Jocko does. And to all the cynics out there, okay, this is another Navy SEAL book, another military guy writing a book. And I know that out there in the military world, I've just heard of this, not because I was in the military, but especially with Navy SEALs almost look down on other Navy SEALs who write books about their experience as Navy SEALs and then discipline and all that. I can understand that a little bit. There could be some cynicism there and all that, but nonetheless, I think this is a book of value, great value. Tomas, what were some points that you took home from it?
Oh, I don't know if
we haven't read the whole thing,
right?
So
going
it's not
into
like
specific points, but if you read the introduction, you really get a taste of. It is kind of it's a book with military examples. So, right. But they go through the situations where they have to make decisions. And they have to own those decisions that they make. It's life or death.
Right?
And most of the time in business, when you're in a leadership position in a business, your decisions aren't life or death necessarily. But if you make a wrong decision, people could lose their jobs, which affects their family. And it's a similar type of thing. So I think everybody can relate to it. And I'm really excited to read it. So we would like to challenge everybody out there to read it with us, post different things on social media, different thoughts from the chapters, and I think we'll try to give you an update as we go along through the book as well, and just encourage everybody to continue their own personal development. So, yeah,
books like this can be helpful. The difficulty is, the self-help section really isn't that helpful a lot of the time. It gives false wisdom and other things, but there are a few that really rise above the rest in the plethora of leadership and business books out there, and this is certainly one of them. If you want to start off with listening just to Jocko's podcast, maybe get a feel for what he's talking about. He talks about the very things that he mentions in the book. So if you're not as much of a reader, but you have a long commute, listen to his podcast. I don't know if they have the book on Audible though, so that may not be an option for you. But I will mention one main point from it that really is the whole. Just by the title, you can get this. You can glean this. It's extreme ownership, and the concept is. Owning, and I think it especially challenges us in owning our mistakes. Mm-hmm. So if you are in a position of leadership, it doesn't matter if you're in charge of 5 people or if you're in charge of 500. If you've been given leadership or leadership role, and this actually, I think it goes, and I think Jocko points this out too, that it goes all the way down to the private in the military who has just the responsibility to help his fellow soldiers or fellow Marines or whoever else. You may be at the very bottom of the totem pole, and you still have responsibility. So anyway, it's about owning your position that you've been given, especially if you have been given a position over others, that if the team, that's another aspect he points out, this is a team thing. If your team that you're leading fails, it's on you. Mm-hmm. Take responsibility. Stop complaining about how so-and-so didn't do this right. So-and-so didn't understand this correctly. So-and-so went too far there. if you're the leader over those people, you need to assume responsibility. Did you do those individual actions? No, but they conducted those individual actions under your command. So take responsibility for it. So that's a big aspect of this book, and I think it could be helpful to a lot of people there, whether you're in business, school, a parent, whatever else. Could be real helpful. So that's all I'll say about that. Tomas, what's going on this weekend? Anything?
I'm going to Cincinnati for a Reds versus Cardinals game. Excited
Excellent.
about that. Johnny Bench bobblehead weekend this weekend, so
Good deal.
exciting.
Little
Anything? You doing
bobbleheads.
anything?
And there's not really anything else. People are going back to school every week.
A lot of
so-
people back to school this week. So
And next week, Purdue's back in session. I'm sure that's the case for a lot of universities. So any students out there listening, do well, work hard, and
my little plug out here.
Yeah.
School's back in session. Everybody be careful around school buses.
Yep.
Don't do anything.
it's kind of like being around
silly.
farm equipment, right? Don't get upset that your commute is
And,
delayed. Just
yeah,
get up
we're-
earlier.
T-minus 30 days from harvest.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll talk more about that.
Yeah,
I'm sure here in
sure.
the future. So
Well, to all of you out there, do check out bain-walker.com. Give us a like, a share on Facebook if you would, and on Twitter. Retweet if you would the episode. We'd really appreciate that. Do subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And next time that we come back by, next Friday, hopefully, Lord willing, we'll talk about what's current out there in the world. Until then, have a great weekend. Have a great week. Thank you all. Thanks, Tomas.